and I'm Mike Black. And what I do is every week I bring in experts to talk about solutions to challenges that business leaders in the middle market face. Today, we're talking about outsourcing your IT. It's really, there's a business case. I'll tell you a story to get started is that a couple years ago, we were working with a company in Virginia and they wanted us to work on their website, get it to load faster. And I had a software developer who really did a great job in getting that to happen. The website, we fixed some things up. I don't want to get into the technical details of what we did, but it started loading faster. But as a part of that, we had to make some technical changes in their domain. And unfortunately, because he was a software developer and not an IT person, he made some changes that actually turned off a bunch of services and created some real challenges for them for about a week until we could get it all figured out. That's not true. For a day, well, they figured it all out. But it was a challenge because it also deleted some old records. And that's really where this comes from, is that even if you're a technical company with a software developer, there may be a business case for you to outsource your IT. And so let me do some quick introductions as we get started today. Today, my guest is Jeff Fantalis. He is the managing partner of Be Inventive. And I hate to say it, I forgot to print out his thing, but I know Jeff is an IT pro and they do all sorts of IT stuff. And we'll get into that in just a minute. I'm just off my game today. My name is Mike Black. I guess I should be on this screen here. I am the CEO and managing partner of Page Black, least important person on this call. We've got Jeff today to talk about what's the business case for outsourcing your IT. And so we're going to start with that question. And so the question I want to start with is, in what situations should a company outsource their IT support? And so we're going to start here, Jeff, as we're starting this off. I want you to think about a company that has maybe between 50 and 75 people. They have somebody who's technical, who's managed it. We've both seen it. In fact, this was the company that I was working with. 75 people. They were doing about 10 million, I believe, is where they were in that company. They were doing really well, but some definite challenges with that. So what's the business case? What are the situations they should consider?
It is different, Mike, and thanks for having me. It is different depending on the size of the company. The return on your investment kind of changes over time depending on your size. So using the 50-person company, it's an easy return on investment. It really is. You can barely afford one person if you're a 50-person company. And there's just no way that one person can know everything you need to know. And so they're going to struggle with components. They're going to guess on things. And you don't have people with coverage. And that one person is going to cost a lot more than most outsourcing companies would cost you. So with an outsourced company, you're going to get a whole team of people, or at least typically. I'll talk more in terms of what we do. Most other companies do similar things. So with us, you'll get a whole team of people that will be supporting you with all different skill sets, all different coverages in terms of when they're there and so forth. And like I said, it's going to cost you less than having your own IT person. So the ROI is pretty easy on a 50-person company. What you lose, we talk about the negatives, is you don't typically have the person sitting right next to you. And it's just more of a modern way of working, right? That, we're all getting used to that now, right? A lot of companies are remote already anyway. But you do get a team of people who are able to respond. So rather than walking next door and saying, hey, Jimmy, can you fix this for me? It's, sending a message or an email or a phone call, depending on how the company works. And having a group of people who are able to respond, and having someone who hopefully is an expert in that particular area, not someone who's going, I'm not really a network guy, but let me see if I can figure it out. Hopefully with an outsourced company, you're getting someone, if it's a network problem, able to say, oh, okay, I'm a network guy. I know how this is set up. I've seen this 50 times. I know exactly how to fix it. So that's really the difference.
So if I'm a CEO of, say, that 50-person company, and I've had somebody managing it who's sort of technical, but not an IT person, and it's just time to make that, I'm thinking of hiring a more capable IT person, or maybe my first IT person. Right. What's that cost?
Well, IT people, depends. If you're hiring one person, you probably have to hire a really good person. Again, no one person knows everything. And so they're not going to know a lot of areas, but a good IT person fully loaded, is going to be 6 digits. It's a matter of how good they are, whether it's low 6 digits or mid 6 digits. You're going to in most areas, again, there are some areas of the country where maybe you can get someone a little under 6 digits, fully loaded. I'm talking, for office space and, benefits and all that, right? When you fully load them. So
you're thinking kind of $10,000 a month in cost for that IT
Yeah.
person. It could be 15, it could be a little bit less than 10, depending. I can't imagine it's less than 10.
Yeah, it can be less than 10, but if you get someone that, let's say you're paying 70,000 a year, they're likely not going to have as broad set of experiences as you would want if you only have one person. You mentioned something before, so I'll jump topics here a little bit. But one thing we see a lot for smaller companies is, let's say a 50-person company, if they have technical people, they feel like, well, we can manage this ourselves. But there's a difference between coders and different technologists and IT people. And so we run into that a lot. I'll give an example. I love real examples. We got brought in by a company to talk to them. They were a technology company, development kind of side of things. And they had some problems, which is why someone recommended they talk to us. Came in, I spoke to the CEO and kind of talked about what we did and what the benefits are. And at the end, he says, that's all good stuff. And I can't disagree with anything he said, but we're getting by enough now. And kind of, he didn't say these words, but what he was really saying is, I don't really want to spend the money. I'm not spending it now. And kind of the discussion point was, well, you kind of are. You're just grabbing it from different people whose focus is being pulled away from what they're supposed to be doing. In any case, he decided not to do it. 2 or 3 months later, I get a call from him. Something went wrong in their IT. Their business was majorly affected for a few days. He finally called us. Can we fix it? He told us what was wrong. It was no problem. We were able to fix it quickly. He immediately hired us. It wasn't even a money thing anymore. He didn't even ask me at that point. When he said, I want to hire you, he didn't say, I might want to hire you. What is it going to cost? He said, when can we really get this started where you take over our IT? A handful of months later, he said to me, I wish I did this 2 or 3 years ago, because he didn't realize the burden that his people were taking on to manage IT that weren't experts in IT. He didn't realize the little nuanced problems that people were having with the way the technology worked that we were able to resolve. And their company was just able to run better, which is why you have technology.
All right. I took a drink at the wrong time there. So I guess if I'm a skeptical CEO and it's really important to me to have somebody on site, I just want that comfort that they're going to be there. They can, and I get help desk can be done that way. I know enough about, I'm not an IT person, but so what are the gaps I might worry about? If I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to spend that $120,000 a year, let's just call it that, or maybe it's 150 because it's important to me. I'm a 50-person company. I want somebody on site that I can trust. I can meet with them face to face. What are the skill sets that I absolutely have to have, or gaps that you see when you're walking into a company? What do I need to worry about is my question.
That's a tough one, Mike. You didn't tell me you're going to be throwing fastballs today. I can't tell you exactly what you need because it's too many things. You typically need someone who knows networking. You typically need someone who knows systems. You typically need someone these days who knows cloud, who knows applications, who knows email, who knows file systems. So you can find someone maybe who knows 30 or 40% of those things, who knows it well. Not someone who dabbles, but knows it well, who you can rely on to make good decisions. What we see sometimes in those situations is we come in and a certain area, let's say that 30 to 40% is really working great, but the other 60%, there were a lot of, let's say, bad decisions made. Decisions that cost them a lot more money, decisions that cost the environment to not work as well. And that's not a ding on the person. That person's been brought in as one person to try to do something that it would be really difficult for one person to be very successful.
Right. And so the risk, it seems to me the big risk I would want, and me, I don't know enough about this to know anything other than what I'm going to ask you, is cybersecurity is such a big deal that you hear about companies where they got hacked. Somebody got into the CEO's email and managed to get in there and do some, not phishing, but essentially start sending out emails and send themselves 40 grand. That can't be recovered.
That's the more obvious thing, Mike. Obviously you can hire someone who has more security experience. They'll have less experience something else. That's certainly the more obvious and more painful thing. But there's also just the day-to-day technology that supports your company running it's not, you're not going to notice that as much if it's not running as well. You may know it, but the effects of that over the long term are quite high, right? If everyone in your company is always having issues, little issues, that how they run, the computer runs slow. It takes, longer to get into this environment. You're running a VPN so that the connection is very slow when maybe you didn't need a VPN. There's all these little things that add up over time that are around usability, right? That can eat up, minutes a day. If every person in your company is losing 10 minutes a day and you're a 50-person company, that's a lot of money you're losing.
And it wouldn't be hard when I've had computer problems and it's taken me a half day to fix them.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
right?
There are things here and there, right, that build up. And so, yes, security, of course, is really important. And there are good ways and bad ways to do security like anything else, right? There are inexpensive ways that can be very effective, and there are very expensive ways that can be very ineffective. Usually the expensive ways are ineffective going back to usability, right? Where your IT has been told, make sure we're really secure. And so their focus is on security and not usability. And so what happens is everything runs slow. You need passwords, into every system, and it logs you out in 3 minutes. And so you're going in and out of systems, having to log in, and every system is so slow. And it's kind of a pet peeve of mine that you've always got to balance those two things, right? You got to balance security and usability, because you can have the most secure system that nobody wants to use. So what good is it?
All right. No, absolutely. Like, you could spend an hour a day entering passwords and not, like, legitimately, that could be a struggle, and they may not be that protecting more important things.
Changing your password is also a thing of the past, and we run into that now with companies that haven't kept up with the time. So yeah, I mean, if you have to change your passwords in your environment, chances are you're not following modern protocols in terms of how to do things. So
all right. So I've learned, check, do not make my team change passwords.
No.
All right. That's good to know. I literally didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So what happens if we talked about this kind of 50 to 75 person company. What if it's 150 to say 200 people?
Yeah.
What is that a different business case?
It is. Because now you can afford maybe 2 people, right? Let's say a 150 person company. You can probably afford 2 people. As you get bigger, the ROI starts to shrink. It still can be there, and it depends on what's important to you, right? So 150, 200 person company, you might have 2, maybe 3 people that are in your IT staff. Now you have a broader set of skills. Broad enough? Probably not. You probably still have some pretty big holes in a 2-3 person IT staff. You still have some coverage issues, things like that. Cost wise, we're in the 50 person company. We're going to be a lot cheaper than the 1 person. On a 150 person company, let's say with 3 people, kind of quickly doing the math, we're going to be a little cheaper, without getting into the details, right? We'll still be a little cheaper. You're still going to get a bigger team. Still don't have to worry about things like hiring, which is not easy to do right now. You're going to probably have some better coverage. If 2 people and your 3-person company want to take vacation at the same time, and now each one has kind of their own skill sets and areas of coverage, right? In terms of like systems, now you have a problem, things like that. So there's still typically an ROI. When you get to be that size, you start to think more about things like, I don't want to manage that, right? I want someone else to manage it for me. You start to think more about strategic values, right? So with our service, it includes strategic advice, kind of your fractional CIO type role in terms of the advice that we give. And those things start to become more important. But again, as a 150 person company, you can't afford a CIO, right? That's a $250,000, $300,000 role fully loaded. So you start to get more value out of strategy things now than maybe as a 50 person company. It's more basic. And still strategy is important, but as you get bigger, the strategy becomes more important. So the types of things in the ROI tend to change, but bluntly, the ROI starts to get a little smaller over time. I personally kind of look at it as 500 to 700 people is probably when I would move away from outsourcing. You can start to use a company like ours for supplemental IT is what I call it. So you can put that 5, 6, 7 person team together, still knowing that you're not going to hit everything, even with that large a team, and then use another company to fill in the gaps for specializations here and there. But that's sort of additive work versus day-to-day work. Your 5 to 7 person kind of IT group can handle at that point almost all of, if not all of, your day-to-day work that needs to be done.
All right. So I'm just thinking back to that 150 person company. It's, if I'm a CEO of that company and I'm thinking through this piece, I had a question for you here and it just went out the window. Hang on a half second.
I'm doing the math in my head too about what it would cost for the different, people. So keep going.
Okay. So if it's a 150 person company and I do want the in-house component and that's what it was. Okay. Sorry. In marketing, when we do this, so we can function as an outsourced marketing team.
Right.
And I'm curious if there's a difference in marketing when I'm going into a company. I will never know that company quite as well as somebody that works there 40 hours a week. Right. I bring expertise around, understanding marketing at a deeper level, how marketing works, what the processes are, but I'm never going to have that internal knowledge that is really integral to our success. So sometimes it's a really good fit for them to have a marketing assistant who can kind of be that in-house person, and they become our kind of contact at that company. CEO is just typically just too busy for that. Does that apply to IT?
Does a little, but not probably as much as marketing. I'll probably look at this more through, everyone thinks their stuff's, the coolest, most difficult, right? So IT is a little harder to split up. We do have that with some clients, and you can make it work. But I find that if we're running the show, if we have the main part of IT, it's hard to have other people who work for the client as part of that. Like anything else, we're kind of a well-oiled group that knows how to work together, and you throw in someone from outside into that, and it can make things more difficult. It's doable, certainly. And you're right in terms of knowing the environment, right? Someone who's there every day. One of the things we do to combat that is we typically have, especially as the client gets bigger, we typically have one of our senior people who are responsible for that client to really know it. So no, they're not working necessarily 40 hours a week, but they may be working 10 hours a week just on that client. And so they will get to know that client pretty darn well, as opposed to just generic client. They know that client, they know, who are all the executives, they know their business model, they know how they run, they know even the systems that we don't manage, like we don't typically get involved in ERP. They know what kind of ERP system they have and what the struggles are, because IT needs to, the core IT needs to work with those sorts of things too. So you do get some of that, but yeah, you're right. There's a balance. You can't say that one thing has all the pluses and none of the minuses, right? There are pluses and minuses with every solution.
Right. No, it makes sense. It's a real, that's one of our top challenges. I actually have to filter customers out and say no to certain customers because they're just not going to be able to collaborate well. They're too busy. They don't have a marketing assistant. They're jerks. Those kinds of things. And so I have to say no, because it's either, it isn't going to work well from that perspective.
No, I'm going to get to all my clients are wonderful, Mike, by the way.
Okay, there you go. Well, if you're one of Jeff's clients, he thinks you're wonderful. I appreciate that. Before we go through, we're going to ask our next question in just a minute. I want to talk a little bit about Page Black and what we do. It really is communication support for today's business landscape. That we do a couple of things differently. We'll come in and serve as an outsourced marketing team, where we'll come in and do a discovery project, really figure out what the goals are, what is the messaging, where should it be done, and then we'll build a campaign and execute that campaign as an outsourced marketing team. Secondary of support is we'll go in with companies that have sales teams and they're not closing some of the deals that they want to close. And we'll go in and do a research project. We will ask the people they're not getting business with, the people they've gotten business with, and figure out what is going wrong and help them close more of those deals. Third area of support is strategic internal communications. And that is, how do you market to potential and current employees, which is a real strain for companies today. So that's the right job ads to pull the right people in and then keep them there through great communication. It's not HR practices. All right, our next question, as I thumb through here, Jeff started this conversation, but I want to hear this from a couple of different sizes. It's, when should they have an internal team? And I'm going to ask the question, let's go back to the size. And this one, it may be a little harder. I don't know. If it's a 75-person company, in what situation does it make sense for them to have that internal team?
I don't know if I've run into a case where it was a 75-person company. It does make sense at all to have an internal
Mhm.
team. I'm very biased, right?
Right.
This is what we do for a living, and if I didn't believe in what we did, I'd have a problem. But it's difficult to have that. You can have, like, we recommend splitting IT when you get big enough into what we call core IT, all your day-to-day stuff, and
Mhm.
application management, where, like, let's say you have I'll use a real example. We have a client who has a Sage environment that's very complicated. There's a lot of third-party systems that integrate with it. We're not Sage experts. We're not going to manage their Sage. And so we recommended to them when they were talking to us about outsourcing IT that they let us handle the day-to-day core IT, but they separate out their application management because that was so specific to them. When we deal with email is email, right? Everyone's set up a little differently. We're experts in it. But when you deal with something like Sage and all the ways that you interact with that and all the systems that interact with that and all the very business oriented things that are specifically programmed into how you're using it, that's where I think it's more helpful to have an internal staff. And so we recommended to them that they sort of split their IT, because what was happening was they had one group that was doing both. And so the Sage stuff kept pulling their time away because it's more closer to the business, right? More closer. It's closer to the business. And so that always got the attention, and their core IT was suffering, which is why they originally brought us in. And so our recommendation was to split those two things out, let the application management people focus on the application management, and let us
Mhm.
fix their core IT, let us fix their security, let us fix those kind of day-to-day, 10-minute a day issues that their people were having. And they bought into it, and they're very happy with how that result was. So as you grow, you can do that. But for the 75-person company, I would have a hard time justifying an internal person. It just, the dollars and abilities just don't line up well. The 1,000-person company, I'd have a hard time doing the opposite, right? I'd have a hard time justifying outsourcing your IT if you're a
Mhm.
1,000-person company. We could argue over whether the line is at 200, 500, or 800, right, as to where it flips, and a lot will depend on the company itself.
Mhm.
But I think the 75, it's pretty hard to make an argument besides comfort, besides the CEO, wants that person, in the office next to them, that, they can walk out and get help right away. Otherwise, beyond the comfort, it's really hard to justify it in my mind.
All right. The only thing I can think of as you talk about this is, and I'm curious. So one would be is if they're doing anything like defense or national security oriented work, where maybe it just makes sense from an ROI perspective of, like, by the time you vet a vendor, and I know you guys would work with them and you would be fine, you would keep things confidential, and I'm sure you guys are qualified for that. But what about that situation?
I mean, that's a good example that could be. It really depends on what level you need to be and what level your outsourced IT provider needs to be, right? Because sometimes your company needs to be, let's say, NIST 800 171 compliant, but your outsourcer doesn't necessarily. They just have to follow your processes. There are
Mhm.
also going to be outsourced IT companies that will be NIST compliant that you could bring in to meet those
Mhm.
requirements. But if you get really deep on the security side and at a certain level, it would be hard for a third party to manage it. So there are always kind of one-off scenarios that we can come up with, and that's a good one that may make sense. But, like,
Okay.
we have a client right now that is a government contractor that is going to NIST, and we're helping them through that, and they're going to stay our client, I hope. So we're moving them over to Microsoft's government cloud, and we're going to help them toward that NIST process. It's interesting, there are so many regulatory environments. We see so many, whether it's PCI or government or NIST or all these different things. They're all a lot similar. Everyone thinks theirs are so specific, but I mean, they're mostly around having good procedures, having good processes, and having good security. And
Mhm.
there's some nuances to how they're written, but we've helped a lot of our clients. They come to us and say, we have a client that says we have to meet this requirement, even if it's not a standard regulatory one. We have to meet this requirement, and they're all similar, in what they do. And so we're usually able to help clients meet whatever that requirement is. Takes some work sometimes. A lot of it depends on how modern their environment is. Um, We had a client that was in a very modern environment that brought us a very complicated set of things that we were able to just upgrade their Office 365 licenses and spend about 10 hours configuring a few things. And they met this very difficult requirement. And then I thought about it. I said, if this was a kind of an older environment with a bunch of on-premise servers and stuff like that, how would we have done this? And we could have done it, but it probably would have been a couple $100,000 project to meet that same requirement. So there's always that kind of balance between what has to be done and what your environment looks like and how you can make things work. It's one of the scenarios I use to help convince people, that the cloud isn't evil, right? The cloud can be really helpful. If you're in a modern cloud environment, there's a lot you can do with security without a lot of money.
Yeah, I would far rather that whatever cloud service company is managing my security to some degree. I know that that's not perfect, but I think it's a lot better than what I might be able to do personally, at least.
Yeah, there's a lot involved with doing modern security on like internal servers and things like that. There's just so much more you need to do, where there are cloud services that do it like that aren't very expensive.
That's interesting. All right, I've been sitting here. I've been trying to come up with a question to stump you. I gave you 2 hard ones today, and you nailed them. So thank you for that.
Where's my softball?
Friends? I didn't give you any softballs. Well, I guess there were a couple early on. But thanks for coming in today. I hope this was helpful for the audience. I'm going to talk briefly about next week, and we are heading out. Next week, we're talking about when should you bring in a fractional CXO. In this case, I'm going to be speaking with Amanda Harness, and she's a business growth strategist, and she helps companies with their business processes. And so I'll be curious to see, it is that fractional role. When should that happen? I hope you make it. We'll see you next week.